Framework and other options. When I start a new website, I have to think about what framework I'm going to use. I certainly need to use some starter files to address all the various browsers and devices that are out there. This is a real reason to use a framework. I generally consider 3 types of starter templates I might use. Currently, Dreamweaver is supporting Bootstrap, but you can also create a responsive site based on an HTML5 boilerplate. Using the bare bone boilerplate means I have to set up the media queries and do a lot more coding. But as you may know, it's hard to change a lot of the Bootstrap coding, and there's a real sameness that comes with using a Bootstrap template because the rows are either full measure or a small left and right margin from the full browser side. What are the advantages of using a framework? According to awards.com, there are advantages of using a framework. Speeds up the markup process. This is because the look and the feel is part of the template. I actually think this is a negative of using a template, though. Clean and tidy code. The code is often minified and removes spaces and other characters that allows a programmer to easily read code. But it processes much quicker. This adds to your inability to follow the code, however. Solutions to common CSS problems such as focus and resizing images. Browser compatibility, which is probably the biggest advantage of using a framework. Addresses all modern browsers and the way that code changes between various browsers and devices. Learn good practices. You see what experts think is good practice. Having a single procedure to resolve common problems makes maintaining various projects more straightforward. I agree with that, except I don't really ever do this, so I'm always having to look at what I'm using for a framework or a CMS or whatever. Helpful and collaborative work. I know that this is recently came up in a project where I used flex boxes, and the fellow designer could not figure out the code. We ended up using an HTML5 template, much to my chagrin, because of her inability to figure out how flex boxes worked. What are the disadvantages of using a framework? According to awards.com, there are disadvantages of using a framework. Misses content and presentation because the code is so hard to replace. Local styling is often applied. Unused code left over. Of course, if you do not use code, you rarely delete. In fact, I often comment out unused code in case I need it later. Slower learning curve. The CSS and the JavaScript files are often minimized, so reading and changing them are very challenging. You don't learn to do it yourself. That being said, I don't think that these frameworks templates are for the novice. It takes a lot to drill down through the code, actually. Here is an HTML5 template generator that I use to start projects. These are very bare bones, so I get to actually design, which I like. So if you really are not thinking about doing a lot of your own media queries or incorporation of components in Dreamweaver, these are not for you. So I usually start my project using the classic HTML5 template generator on initializer.com. This classic H5BP allows me to pick the following things. Here's what I get. No template. I get Modernizer. I get jQuery. I get Internet Explorer support. And some other things like a fav icon and a 404 page to customize. This is usually enough for me, and it gives me a lot of creative possibilities. However, you can also choose a responsive template with mobile-first media queries and Bootstrap queries. The big advantage to using either of these two is that they come set up with a responsive navigation that changes to a hamburger option for smaller breakpoints. This actually saves me a lot of time, but once again, I don't get to really customize what I'm doing. Dreamweaver templates. There are responsive starters and there are Bootstrap starters. I'm always very cautious about using Dreamweaver features. I've been using Dreamweaver since before it was an Adobe product, and one thing I know is that things go away from Dreamweaver and they cannot be coded if they were unique to Dreamweaver or changed later on. The Fluid Grid, which was a boilerplate template, has been supported and not supported in Dreamweaver for several years. You can still find these features in Dreamweaver's templates, however. Responsive starters. To use a responsive starter, go to Starter, Templates, Responsive Starters, and there's several responsive media query pages that you can use. Let's take a look inside. You know you have the basis for a responsive site here based on media queries. If you take a look, you can see that. The Bootstrap starters. Go to File, New, Starter Templates, Bootstrap Starters, and there are several Bootstrap pages. Notice that Bootstrap comes with a responsive navigation that you can make your very own. A look inside. You now have the basis for a responsive site based on Bootstrap with the core components of Bootstrap, which is bootstrap.css, jquery.css, your customized styles, and jQuery. So what about Bootstrap templates? I do use these. There's a lot of them out there, and a lot of them are free. Some of the more complex ones you pay for, but they generally have more support to them. And they usually have better customization that's already set up for you to change. I just finished a small project where I used a Bootstrap template and changed the colors, images, and even the rows to make it my own site. Just look at all the files, both CSS and JavaScript that came with this file. I made changes to the HTML and the main CSS file to create my mini site with a fully functional responsive navigation. And that sort of worked really well for me. So do whatever you think is best. Sometimes I actually spend a lot of time deciding what I'm going to do for a site, and may even start several times until I come up with a solution that's going to work for me.